What I found at the Serenity Mountain retreat was something far more unsettling. My neighbor, Tom, was there with his wife, just like me and David. We were all searching for something. But then, one afternoon, Tom cornered me by the juice bar. "I have a special technique for releasing tension," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing intensity. What followed was a descent into a world of twisted desires, hidden agendas, and shocking revelations that would shatter my carefully constructed life. You won't believe what happened. The air at Serenity Mountain Retreat crackled with a forced tranquility that grated on my nerves. Towering pines whispered secrets to the wind, while yoga instructors chanted affirmations that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I was here ostensibly to reconnect with David, to rekindle the flame that had dwindled to a flicker amidst the pressures of our demanding lives. But if I am being honest, I was only going through the motions. The fire was gone, and with it, our marriage. The brochure had promised a transformative experience, a journey of self-discovery and renewal. What it had delivered was a week of overpriced organic kale smoothies, awkward couples therapy sessions led by a perky blonde with a suspiciously serene smile, and a nagging sense that I was trapped in a high-end cult. This was all such nonsense. I hated every single part of it. "Enjoying the meditation, darling?" David asked, his voice a familiar blend of concern and mild condescension. We were lounging by the infinity pool, the turquoise water mirroring the vast expanse of the California sky. David, tanned and relaxed in his designer swim trunks, looked every inch a successful real estate lawyer, effortlessly at home in this world of privilege and pretense. But was that all there was? To pretend it was enlightening, I replied, forcing a smile. The meditation session had consisted of an hour of guided visualization, during which I had imagined myself floating in a sea of lavender and inner peace. The reality had been a restless mind, a throbbing headache, and a burning desire to escape this suffocating charade. Did anyone actually feel any better after all of this? Good, good, David said, patting my hand absently before turning back to his book, a weighty tome on the intricacies of property law. As he looked down at the book, I was suddenly turned off. How could I even want to be with someone like that? My gaze drifted across the pool, landing on Tom and his wife, Susan. They were new to the retreat, having arrived just yesterday. Tom, a man in his early 50s, with a ruggedly handsome face and piercing blue eyes, exuded an air of quiet confidence that immediately drew my attention. Susan, in contrast, was a petite, almost mousy woman who seemed to shrink in her husband's shadow. As she faded into the background, I wondered what he wanted. As he looked up, I averted my gaze. Did he see that I was just a shell of a person? They were engaged in a heated discussion, their voices hushed, but their expressions animated. I couldn't make out the words, but I could sense the tension simmering between them, a palpable undercurrent of resentment and suppressed anger. The tension in their muscles was as strong as the tension in the air. "Penny for your thoughts, Sarah?" David asked, his voice startling me. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just admiring the view," I replied, forcing a casual tone. David followed my gaze, his eyes narrowing slightly as they landed on Tom and Susan. "They seem intense," he observed, his voice tinged with a hint of disapproval. Perhaps they're just passionate, I replied, my voice sounding more defensive than I intended. David chuckled, a dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. Passionate, or simply dysfunctional? As I looked across the pool, Tom looked into my eyes. A wave of attraction flew to me, and the world was suddenly different. This was all starting to become very real. We continued walking, our silence now charged with a shared understanding. The path led us away from the main group, deeper into the woods, the sounds of nature amplifying the intimacy of our unexpected encounter. It was as if we were the only people on Earth. Sarah, Tom said, his voice low, breaking the silence. Can I be honest with you? He reached and caressed my hand. It was like everything was coming together. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know, Tom. Should you be? The way he looked at me was as if he was in love with me. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his blue eyes piercing through my carefully constructed defenses. I feel like I can talk to you, he confessed, like you understand. I don't feel that way about her. It hasn't been easy between Susan and I. She looks to you. I look to you, Sarah. The comment stunned me into silence. I wasn't sure what to say. It was as if he had put all of his cards on the table. I shouldn't be telling you this, he continued, his voice laced with a hint of desperation. But I can't help myself. I can't stop thinking about you, Sarah. About how beautiful you are, how intelligent you are, how alive you make me feel. A wave of heat washed over me. His words were both intoxicating and terrifying. I wanted to run, to escape the dangerous pull of his attraction. But I was frozen, mesmerized by his gaze, captivated by his honesty. Tom, this is wrong, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I'm married. You're married. We can't do this. But did I even mean it? He stepped closer, closing the distance between us. His body almost touched mine, and it set me on fire. He looked down at my eyes and said nothing more. I know, he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. But I can't help how I feel. And I don't believe that what we feel is wrong. He reached out and gently touched my face, his fingertips sending shivers down my spine. You deserve to be happy, Sarah, he said softly. You deserve to feel alive, and I think I can give you that. His touch was like a spark, igniting a flame that had been dormant within me for far too long. All of my doubts, my fears, my carefully constructed defenses seemed to melt away in the heat of his gaze. I had to do something. Before I could stop myself, I leaned in and kissed him. The kiss was tentative at first, a hesitant exploration of shared desire. But as our lips met, a surge of electricity coursed through me, shattering the fragile hold I had on my self-control. It had been so long since I kissed someone like that. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more urgent, more desperate. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer, his body molding against mine. His lips tasted good, and I needed more of it. All I could do is submit and desire. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment, allowing myself to feel everything without reservation, without guilt. The forest around us faded away, replaced by a swirling vortex of heat and desire. We broke apart, breathless, our eyes locked in a silent exchange of understanding. The air crackled with unspoken longing, a desperate need for something more. "Sarah," Tom whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. I. He started and took a step back. Before he could finish, a voice cut through the stillness of the forest. "Sarah, is that you?" It was like we were getting caught doing something wrong. My heart skipped a beat. "David," we pulled apart, our faces flushed, our bodies trembling with adrenaline. The world seemed to snap back into focus. The trees, the birds, the rustling leaves suddenly amplified, as if mocking our stolen moment. All of the sudden, it was as if everything came crashing down. David emerged from the trees, his expression a mixture of confusion and suspicion. His eyes narrowed as they landed on Tom, and I could see the realization dawning in his face. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice tight with barely concealed anger. The air thickened with tension, the serene mountain setting now a stage for an impending confrontation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the chaos that threatened to erupt. David's gaze burned into me, a silent accusation that stripped away any pretense of innocence. "David, it's not what it looks like," I stammered, my voice trembling slightly. "A total lie." He scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Isn't it? Because it looks like my wife is having a secret rendezvous with our neighbor in the middle of a nature hike." It was as if he was trying to hold back what he was going to do. "We were just talking," I protested, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "Talking? With your lips locked together?" he retorted, his eyes narrowing. Tom stepped forward, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "David, it was my fault," he said, his voice firm. "I initiated it. Sarah didn't do anything wrong." "Oh, I'm sure she didn't," David replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He then looked to the sky as if he was thinking. He turned his gaze back to me, his eyes filled with a pain that cut me to the core. "How could you do this to me, Sarah?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "After everything we've been through, after all the years we've spent together," tears welled in my eyes. "David, I'm so sorry," I pleaded, reaching out to touch him. "It just happened. I don't know what to say." "You have no idea." He flinched away from my touch, his eyes filled with a raw hurt that made my stomach churn. "Don't," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just don't." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone with Tom in the middle of the forest, the weight of my actions pressing down on me like a physical burden. It was as if I lost everything. "Sarah," Tom said softly, reaching out to take my hand. I pulled away, shaking my head. "No, Tom," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "This was a mistake, a huge mistake." As we stood there, there was a great sense of regret. I turned and ran, stumbling through the trees, desperate to escape the scene, to escape the guilt, to escape the consequences of my actions. As I ran, I tripped and fell. I started to feel around, and then I realized there was a bush that was sticking out. I burst from the trees, emerging onto a small, secluded clearing, bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun. And there, sitting on a small rock, was Emily Olson. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I saw you," she said softly. "Emily, I began, my voice catching in my throat. "It is okay," she repeated. "He had relations with the yoga instructor last week." It was at that point it didn't matter to me. I looked up, shocked. As our eyes met, I could feel a connection between the two of us. She continued, "He isn't right for me. I realized that when he did that. You would have realized that when he does that to you." "It doesn't make me feel any better," I exclaimed. I couldn't believe that something so bad happened to me. "It is time for him to go. For all of our sake." What was she thinking? The air thickened with tension, the serene mountain setting now a stage for an impending confrontation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the chaos that threatened to erupt. David's gaze burned into me, a silent accusation that stripped away any pretense of innocence. "David, it's not what it looks like," I stammered, my voice trembling slightly. "A total lie." He scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Isn't it? Because it looks like my wife is having a secret rendezvous with our neighbor in the middle of a nature hike." It was as if he was trying to hold back what he was going to do. "We were just talking," I protested, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "Talking? With your lips locked together?" he retorted, his eyes narrowing. Tom stepped forward, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "David, it was my fault," he said, his voice firm. "I initiated it. Sarah didn't do anything wrong." "Oh, I'm sure she didn't," David replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He then looked to the sky as if he was thinking. He turned his gaze back to me, his eyes filled with a pain that cut me to the core. "How could you do this to me, Sarah?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "After everything we've been through, after all the years we've spent together," tears welled in my eyes. "David, I'm so sorry," I pleaded, reaching out to touch him. "It just happened. I don't know what to say." "You have no idea." He flinched away from my touch, his eyes filled with a raw hurt that made my stomach churn. "Don't," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just don't." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone with Tom in the middle of the forest, the weight of my actions pressing down on me like a physical burden. It was as if I lost everything. "Sarah," Tom said softly, reaching out to take my hand. I pulled away, shaking my head. "No, Tom," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "This was a mistake, a huge mistake." As we stood there, there was a great sense of regret. I turned and ran, stumbling through the trees, desperate to escape the scene, to escape the guilt, to escape the consequences of my actions. As I ran, I tripped and fell. I started to feel around, and then I realized there was a bush that was sticking out. I burst from the trees, emerging onto a small, secluded clearing, bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun. And there, sitting on a small rock, was Emily Olson. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I saw you," she said softly. My heart sank. She knew. She had seen everything. But where did she come from? "Emily, I began, my voice catching in my throat. She held up her hand, silencing me. "It's okay, Sarah," she said gently. "I know." As she looked up, I started to calm down. "It is okay. It is okay," she repeated. "He had relations with the yoga instructor last week." It was at that point it didn't matter to me. I looked up, shocked. As our eyes met, I could feel a connection between the two of us. She continued, "He isn't right for me. I realized that when he did that. You would have realized that when he does that to you." "It doesn't make me feel any better," I exclaimed. I couldn't believe that something so bad happened to me. "It is time for him to go, for all of our sake." What was she thinking? Emily's words hung in the air, a surprising mixture of empathy and chilling resolve. I stared at her, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of her unexpected confession. What was she planning? What did she mean? "It's time for him to go?" "What are you talking about, Emily?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What do you mean, he isn't right for me?" "What are you planning?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "I've known about Mark for a long time, Sarah," she said softly. "About his infidelity. It's a pattern with him. He's always searching for something he can't find, always chasing after the next thrill." As she said this, it was as if she was trying to protect me. "And you've just accepted it?" I asked, incredulous. "You've just let him run around, hurting people?" She shook her head sadly. "No," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been waiting for the right moment to take control, waiting for it all to come crashing down." "Take control," I repeated, my voice laced with a hint of fear. "What does that mean, Emily? What are you planning to do?" She was starting to scare me. She looked up, her eyes hardening with a newfound resolve. "It's time for him to face the consequences of his actions, Sarah," she said firmly. "It's time for him to learn that he can't just keep hurting people without paying the price." "She's going to do something crazy." A chill ran down my spine. There was something in Emily's voice, something in her eyes, that made me believe she was capable of anything. Was she planning to confront Mark? To expose his infidelities to the world? Or was she planning something far more drastic? "Emily, you can't do anything foolish," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "You can't let him drive you to do something you'll regret. It could get me involved." She smiled, a sad, almost wistful smile. "Don't worry about me, Sarah," she said softly. "I know what I'm doing. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone." As she said these words, I suddenly lost all trust. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees, leaving me standing alone in the clearing. The weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical burden. As she walked away, it was as if I lost my sanity. I stumbled back towards the retreat, the tranquility of the surroundings now twisted into a mocking reminder of the chaos that was unfolding. Each perfectly manicured flower bed, each artfully placed rock, seemed to whisper of secrets and hidden agendas. I need to get out of here. I had to warn Mark, but something told me it was too late. Emily was already setting her plan in motion, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. It was too late. As I entered the main lodge, I saw David sitting alone in the lobby, his head in his hands, his shoulders slumped with defeat. He looked up as I approached, his eyes red and swollen. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "David, I began, but he cut me off." "I know," he said, his voice filled with a weariness that made my heart ache. "Emily told me everything." As he cried, I had to run. My heart sank. He knew about Mark. He knew about Emily. He knew about everything. It was as if she wanted me to find this all out. "David, I'm so sorry," I pleaded, reaching out to touch him. He flinched away from my touch, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "Just go, Sarah," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I can't look at you right now. I just lost everything." I turned and walked away, leaving David alone in the lobby, his grief a palpable presence that filled the air. As I walked away, it was almost if she was trying to take my life. I had to find Mark. I had to warn him about Emily. I had to stop whatever crazy plan she had concocted before it was too late. I raced towards his cabin, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I approached, I saw that the door was slightly ajar. I slowly pushed it open and stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The house was a death trap. The cabin was dark and silent, the only sound the gentle creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. "Mark," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Emily?" There was no response. No one answered back. As I moved further into the cabin, I noticed a strange smell in the air, a sickeningly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. I looked around, trying to identify the source of the smell, and then I saw it. On the coffee table, amidst a scattering of magazines and empty glasses, was a small, ornate box. It was made of dark wood, intricately carved with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and twist before my eyes. This was no good. I approached the box cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached out to touch it, a wave of nausea washed over me, and I felt a sudden urge to turn and run. I shouldn't be doing this, but I couldn't stop myself. My curiosity, my fear, my desperate need to understand what was happening compelled me to open the box. As I lifted the lid, a cloud of thick, sweet-smelling smoke billowed out, filling the cabin with an otherworldly fragrance. It was then that I knew this was the end. As I did so, the smoke started to take form. I recoiled in horror, my eyes widening in disbelief. Inside the box, nestled amidst a bed of velvet, was a small, severed hand. As I looked up, I saw her. Emily was right behind me. "Hello, Sarah," she said. With that, I faded out. Her eyes were not that of Emily's that I was used to. A deep hatred was now in them. "Why, Emily," was the only I could muster. "You are just the reason I am doing this. You made me feel nothing." She then lunged towards me, just like that, with everything she had. I ran forward towards the door. But then I remember Mark. I had to help him. I couldn't run. I turned back towards the cabin and started to search for her. This time it wasn't going to be me running. As I did so, I tripped on the table. It was as if I was supposed to trip on it. But there was one thing that I needed to do. Survive. I ran and ran. As I did so, I could hear someone else enter the cabin. Was it Mark? Had she gotten to him? As I hid in the bathroom, she slowly started to approach. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to do something. Now, I kicked open the bathroom door and lunged. I had caught her by surprise. As she was on the ground, I called the police. It was time for this to stop. As I was talking to the police, I could hear her start moving again. I pushed the table forward to block her, but she kept coming. As I was trying to block her, she came running forward again. I had no option and hit her as hard as I could. Just as I hit her, Mark entered. "What is going on?" he screamed. "This is your doing," I said. "What?" Mark replied. Emily then got up. I forgot how strong she was. It was as if I was fighting for my life. She then went for Mark. "What are you doing?" Mark asked, getting rid of a snake, as she plunged the dagger into his chest. She then slowly fell to the ground. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital. "Mark," I shouted. "He isn't here anymore," said a voice. "It was David. I saved you. I am here." What happened next was a long recovery. As I was resting, I realized that all the things I thought I needed didn't matter. The only thing that truly mattered was being there for someone. After I was released, David was there, waiting. I realized that as those things were happening, what I truly wanted was here, David said. It had been years since I had looked at David in that way. And just for a moment, I lost myself, because I realized it was home.